All right, everyone, welcome back to our videos. This is Unit 2, Video 4, and this is on Renaissance Humanism, another brief overview. And this relates directly to two of our standards. For Standard 2, this relates to being one of the factors that led to the Renaissance. And for Standard 3, it incorporates some of how ancient Greek and Roman culture led to the Renaissance. It also addresses the essential questions, what new ideas and values led to the Renaissance and Reformation, and also who are some of the important artists and writers. We're going to get to some writers today. We've learned a lot about artists, but people were writers as well. So what is this Renaissance humanism? It's the idea that they studied classical texts, meaning the writings of ancient Greece and Rome, and they used that to change the way that they were thinking in that time. So basically, it was a breakaway from the medieval way of thinking about things, a different approach. And if they thought like this, the idea is that they could create something new, right? That create is such an important word when we think of the Renaissance. So here's some features of Renaissance humanism. So by using these Greek and Roman texts, it could change not just how you think, but how you view the world, right? Change your whole mindset of it just this little piece here on earth, a greater world, not just a religious focus of making it to the afterlife, but a worldly idea of incorporating things from around the globe and enjoying your time here on earth, making the most of your time, your ability here on earth, trying to reach your full potential. A lot of that also dealt with the aesthetics, finding beauty in things, having an ideal where things should be beautiful, the rebirth of that idea of individualism, where we've mentioned this in class before. In medieval times, they didn't really care about you being special, right? In the medieval time, your value as a human wasn't worth the same as it is now in the Renaissance. And also to build that curiosity and to find answers, to search for truth. You need that. You need curiosity for that to happen. So I want to go over some people here. Now, Petrarch, this is like way early Renaissance. Some might even say pre-Renaissance, but he's known as the father of Italian humanism. And what Francesco did here is he read a lot of the ancient texts from ancient Greece, ancient Rome. He read lots of Latin and he translated it. And it was more just doing it for fun. He thought that if you use these writings as like a moral guide, a moral compass, you can improve society. And he also didn't just break away from Christian thought. Lots of Renaissance thought is secular, but he did think that you could sort of blend it with Christian thought. Humanism later became more secular, and then it became sort of Christianized again. But at the beginning, it did incorporate a lot of Christian thought. So humanist education was important. Humanist studies, why are social studies and English teachers considered the humanities? That's a whole other idea we can get to. But there was a split with humanists. There were different goals. We can go over them in class as well. But was it just so you can understand the past, so you can understand Greece and Rome? Or was it to use that knowledge to make it better? So think of that Da Vinci quote, "It's not enough to know, you must apply, you must do," right? So this became the dominant form of education for the 1500s. It was not like schools today. People did not all get free public education, right? Not everyone received an education. But for those that did, this was sort of what they were getting. This did sort of lose power by the mid-1600s, and then it became more Christian education and some other things. So here's a list of some really famous humanist scholars. The one on the left is Erasmus. I'm not going to get to him right now because we're going to come back to him when we get to the Reformation. So we're also later going to get to Machiavelli, Thomas More, Francis Bacon, and Rabelais. So I just want to go through a few people that are worth noting as well, such as our buddy Francesco here. So he wrote The History of Italy, and this was a new style of how history was approached, right? The study of history has not been the same throughout time because the way we approach history has changed over time. And he used sources. Think of like primary sources when we use DBQs. He used sources to support his arguments. This is really important, right? You can't just have an opinion. you have to be able to defend it, right? That's like such common knowledge now in your ELA and history classes. But he's the one who first started really using it in the historical approach. We also have Adolphus here. I want to learn a lot more about him because he sounds like a pretty interesting figure. He was from the Low Country, which is now it's part of Germany, but he was definitely a Renaissance man because he was an educator. He was a musician who even built an organ. He was a poet in Latin as well as the vernacular. Vernacular meaning like the language they spoke there at the time. He was a statesman. He was a boxer. Like how cool is that, right? Some of you guys are talking about MMA today, and think of him, right? He also wrote a book on Northern European humanism, and he was known as the wandering scholar of Friesland. And Friesland is there in the Low Countries, but like, I don't know, that's just cool, right? We have Jean Colet of England. He was a theologian and a friend of Erasmus, we'll get to later. He was a dean at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. And he was a Christian humanist. So this is when humanism becomes to get more Christian again, especially in the North. Remember we said how the Northern Renaissance was a bit more Christian. So he thought it was important to use the Bible and scriptures as a guide for people's lives. He wanted to restore Christianity to make it more vibrant and appreciated again. And he saw that humanism could be a method for reform, for change as well. Jacques LaFave de Table. He was another friend of Erasmus, but sometimes they were more like frenemies. I don't know if that's how you spell frenemies, but I'm guessing. Sometimes they argued over some things. He remained Catholic his whole life, but his ideas did lead him, or I should say his ideas were some of the founding ideas that led to Protestantism. He wrote many books. Some of them got him in trouble because they were critical of the Catholic Church, and they said, hey, that's heresy. And he had to go in exile for a while, but the King of France was like a fan, so he supported him. Now, also as a young man, he visited Italy, and remember, we said, how did the Northern Renaissance become a thing? How ideas spread. We said how some like theologians and all went down to Italy and brought ideas back. So he would be a perfect example of that happening. Now, here's like one of my favorites to learn about, Montaigne. So he was a Renaissance man because he was a statesman, like a diplomat, but he also was a philosopher. And you can all thank him for the essay, because I know you love writing essays, right? So he really wrote and compiled beginning essays where he took little ideas and things and shared them. I will say this, if he saw how schools are pumping out these like 5-paragraph factory essays, he'd probably not be happy. Those were not the kind of essays he wrote. They were not 5 paragraphs, but that's another rant. But his writing influenced many other people that we'll talk about later, Bacon, Descartes, Rousseau, so on and so forth. And he's sort of famous in the French for this phrase, what do I know? So if you ever say that, you're a little bit of Montaigne. Now, I want to take a minute to address women of the Renaissance, because every time I read textbooks or like you Google something, it's like, well, Renaissance girls didn't get the same education. They learned how to work with fabrics and stitch and sew, how to manage businesses of their families and their finances, how to manage the servants, how to be a good wife and to be a good Christian woman. But I'm like, but there had to be more than that, right? So I'm in the midst of researching this, and I found a few academic journals online that have addressed this, and there's some books. I don't think I'm going to get this all done by the time the unit ended, but what I found so far is not surprising, that there were women humanist writers and stuff of the Renaissance, like Isata Nogarala here. I may be saying that wrong, but she was an example of a humanist. She was a writer and intellectual. She inspired other female artists and writers. She wrote pieces. She was in Verona. She later moved to Venice. I didn't like the fact that she was considered a female humanist. She was like, why am I not just a humanist? She later then returned to Verona and really just focused on being a theologian. Was basically isolated for the rest of her life, which is sort of sad in some ways. Move to the future, and we have Tara Botti here, and she was a Venetian nun, but she was a writer who wrote at least 7 pieces. 5 of them were published. She corresponded with a lot of cultural and political figures of the day. And she was considered maybe like an early proto-feminist, like, why is there so much misogyny and all in the world, and also a political theorist. These are just two examples I found quickly after reading a few papers online. There's more. So I want, to address that women really only received an education in the Renaissance if they were from like a wealthy family. But you know what? Only males did if they were from wealthy intellectual families then at the time as well. So we don't want to undermine women in any of these topics we cover this year, like history often does. So some connections about the ideas of trying to reach your full potential. We connect this later with the art we've already learned about. What values of humanism do we see in the art? Geography matters, and we'll talk about other ways it connects. So as always, let me know if you have any questions. We can talk about this more because it's always great to talk about this stuff. And enjoy your day.